Good morning. This is Norma Cowie with this week's edition of Norma Talks. Every Wednesday morning, I come together and with some friends who tune in and then they watch as I talk, which is really, really kind of them. This week, I wanted to talk about something that comes up a lot in my transformation work. I talk about it in my readings, but in the readings, I'm just explaining. In the transformation work, I'm transforming energy. We have two major parts of us that really meet the world. It's like for how we meet the world, you could say the two parts that come together. And that is the emotional and the mental. Now, as I have explained, and I know I've done this in other sessions, but I'm going to go over it again because sometimes we need to hear something more than once. Over the years of my study, what I came to realize was that the body's way of talking to us is through feelings. And if we do not acknowledge the feelings, if we do not acknowledge them, and mostly I found just by naming them, I started actually by looking at them as a color, like this, what color is this and where in my body is it? And if I change the shape, if I change the color. And then I finally came to the conclusion that if I just name it, the feeling would subside. In other words, you release the feeling. If you do not, if you go into denial, if you go into rejection, if you go into all those things that say, I don't want to deal with this feeling, then what happens is they kind of get locked in the body, actually, at some point. And also what happens is that they become what we call emotion, because it's like a block. And as I explain sometimes to clients, is they become like rocks in a river. So we've got all these rocks. And of course, because we have those rocks inside of us, we tend to create externally situations that show us that those are there. And then, of course, the more we deny, the more we don't want to listen, the more we don't want to feel. And it's all about feeling. Then we're not listening to what the body says. Now, the body comes from the earth. We'll go back to the earth one way or the other. The soul that we have within us, that inner part of us that goes on when we leave our body, that is part of us that moves on. The emotional part relates to this physical earth that we're on. So that is number one to recognize. The second one is the mind. Now, again, I'm going to deviate a little bit because when I first ran into computers, which was very early in the computer era, it's left me way behind now, but I first began to use computers long before other people did. And I was mesmerized because to me, the people who created the computer created the subconscious mind. You put information in and you get the information out. It is not creative on its own. Our mind is on its own is not creative. The subconscious holds everything within it. And that means all the thoughts that we have, the thoughts that we perpetuate consistently. If we're a worrier and an anxiety, which, by the way, I have a lot of clients coming in because of anxiety these days. And it's like that, the perpetuation of the same thought, because people are not taught how to change their thinking. So we have two parts that are very important to us. We have the mental and we have the emotional. Now, our society supports the mental. Everything about is how you think, and like this is, and this is that way, and that's the other way. And they don't have very little to really say about the emotional. And in fact, they like it if you're very calm and you're not, hysterical about something or other. So what do we do to create? If we're into self-growth, if we're into development of who we are, is one of the big keys I discovered was that we must balance these two. And I'm going to tell you, and I know I have said this before in another talk, probably months ago, through my work, I should say, through the work, I began to realize that in the mental and the emotional needed to be balanced. And I figured out that if we were balanced, then we're more creative. Our minds can move into different areas and different places. We just have a creative energy that comes. And you know where I found it, and this is often happens to me. If I want to know something, it's like a book or a sentence or something or other, and there it is. It was in the Think and Grow Rich, right near the very end of the book. For some reason, I was rereading it one more time, and I like, I think it has, no, that's not the one that has the 40-day prosperity program in it. That's the little green book from Price. But anyway, I was reading Think and Grow Rich, and right at the end, it's one little sentence near the end says, when the mental and the emotional are aligned or together, you are creative. You can be creative. The creative energy flows. And it was like, well, I figured that. So here is another support system to the thought that I had. And that's what I find is very often when the mental and the emotional are not aligned and not in balance, the creative energies are not really working as well as they could. Some people are still creative in their own way, but there's something missing in there. So it's very important if you want to be creative. And what does creative mean? Self-expression. How do you express self? If you do not have that mental and emotional combined and working together, how do you express that individuality that we have that makes us special, makes us unique? Because really, just like our finger, when they talk about fingerprints and eye prints and all those other things that they go on, is showing who we are, is that we are individuals. And the individual is creative because they express how they express themselves. Otherwise, we're just kind of, just spelled out. So let's go over a couple of other things here. Let's look at feelings. The feelings that come up, and I have to tell you, in my life, I was a bundle of feelings for many, many years until I began to really identify the importance of them. And as I began to identify the importance of them, I began to also be aware that by naming them, they did subside and they would just dissipate. And the ones I rejected, the ones I didn't want to feel, some feelings do not feel good. But if you name that, if you can, and I remember when I first started out going from color and shape to naming, I didn't always know what name it was I was dealing with. And I would say, I'm feeling this, but I don't know what its name is. It would still feel satisfied. And quite often to clients, I'll say it's like a kid who wants a cookie. They just don't give up. They whine and grind until, unfortunately, sometimes, spank, or go into your room or go for timeout or whatever, because we don't feel like giving them, or it's not the appropriate time to give them the cookie. Feelings are a lot like that. They'll keep coming back until you acknowledge them. They're like a tireless child that just won't take no for an answer. So it's easier if you just take that moment, feel it, name it, breathe it out if you need to breathe it out, and carry on. And that leaves you, with a lot of clarity. Now, let's look at the mental. They're like the computer. So if we do not begin to get in command of how the thinking process up, the subconscious will, and it filters across our minds. And if you're aware, and I always suggest you create an observer, which is easy enough to do. You just sort of step back in the back of your head. You can think of it a little piece up here, and you can watch your thoughts go by. You don't do it all the time, but you do spend a little bit of time, especially in the beginning, because you want to be aware of what's your thoughts and what you're picking up from other people, because the collective consciousness is out there spilling out all sorts of things. And the collective consciousness right now has a lot of anxiety and fear in it. And so if you're not careful, all of a sudden you're thinking anxiety and fearful thoughts that may not have anything to do with you at all. So part of it is creating an observer to find out what is your thought. How are you thinking? What is going on in that Ferris wheel, basically, that the subconscious has? The more energy you give a thought, the more it returns. And that's where we get that obsessive thinking sometimes, because we've given it a lot of energy. And the more energy we have, the more it's going to repeat itself. And so how do we stop that? A couple of reasons. But one of the things I find works really, really well when you begin to realize that, oh, this is my thought. But somebody else's, there's another exercise I have, which I call energy releasing, where we just basically put it out in a container and we send it off to the sun to be converted to clear light, loving energy. But it's the day-to-day thought patterning about what it is we want to create and where we want to be. So what do? We isolate the thought. Don't want that thought. So what we do is we freeze it in space and time. It's like right there. Then we evaporate it. And then we must replace it, because what a lot of people don't realize, if you do not replace it, the subconscious will just put up what was already there. That it will say, oh, that's missing, here, have it again. So often in the beginning, that same thought can have a lot of arms to it. It could have a lot of feelers out. So sometimes we have to work a little bit to freeze, evaporate, and replace it. Now we need to always replace it with something more like what we want, not just the opposite. It's not about opposites. It's about what do we really want here? And so sometimes we have to give a little bit of thought about what are we about? What do we represent? What is the end result? This has a lot to do with goal setting, for instance, which I'm not necessarily talking about today. So what we want to know is how to do that. So remember, freeze, evaporate, and replace. 3 little words. The replacement of the energy, the replacement of the thought is what's important, because then it's very easy to freeze and evaporate. It's not necessarily easy to implant the new thought that you're wanting to create within your life in the direction that you want to go. So once you begin to talk to your feelings, know what your feelings are, you get quieter inside because your body feels aligned with you. If you are needing to work with your mental, which most people do as well, it's not about just one or the other, then you begin to isolate these thoughts that you don't want, which is creating havoc in your life. Excuse me again. The havoc that we have outside very often comes from us. Now, there's one other point I'd like to point out, because this is where I did a lot of self-growth. My voice is all of a sudden going crackly again. Most of our smokers left our area, but my voice still seems to want to crackle when I talk for a while. Now, what I found is that very often I'd be in a situation, I might meet a person, or I would hear something, and I'd get quite upset inside. And after a while, I began to realize that what was upsetting me. And so I would need to isolate what the feel, and usually was a feeling of something. What was it I was feeling from this person, usually from a person? Could be many people's, but it would be like, there's that thing again. I don't like that. And then I had judgment. Okay, I want to make it clear. When we have judgment on something, when we react to it not very pleasantly, what I began to do was stop and say, where do I do that or have that belief or thought inside me? Because everything on the outside is a reflection of who I am. And if that keeps coming into my life, then there's something in me. Now, sometimes it was the teeniest little bit of what I was seeing demonstrated. Didn't matter, it was still in me. And as soon as I cleared that or forgave myself for it, if it was something that I needed to forgive myself for, as soon as I let that go, then that situation wouldn't bother me. It may not be what I liked, it still may not be top on my list, but it wouldn't have the reaction inside that I was having previously. I'm smiling. If you see me smiling, it's because outside next door, there's a little bit of a factory and there's all of a sudden these big bangs going on. I went, yeah, that's true. Just, yeah, giving me a clap in its own way. Now, so what we're looking at is in a way 3 different things, but they're all tied in. Mentally, I'm going to start there because this is where our society is. Think this, be that, do this, do that, all mental stuff. And if it doesn't fit for you, you need to grab hold of how that subconscious is giving you the thought. Because remember, we are like computers in our subconscious. What you put in will come out. How it comes out into your vibrational rate and will attract to you what that baseline is. Your thinking is important. Don't ever underestimate that. And it's what creates the framework, similar as the house. You put the framework together. The thought patterning does that. The emotion fills in the gaps. It fills it up, fills it in. That's where we get the feeling and the determination, or sometimes we can be right off the, we can overreact and all sorts of other things. So the feeling and mental must work together for you to create a life where you feel whole and complete and at one with yourself and with the world. And I'm just going to add a little tag in there. We're not perfect beings. Sometimes an emotion will overcome us. Sometimes we will forget all the things we know and become just reactive or upset or, sad, depressed, all those things. But what we also need to know is that there is a force that loves us. And that's what's held me a lot. Once I touched into that universal love force, even when I get way off kilter, I can bring myself back because it's always there. It's me that gets lost. And there's no need for you to get lost because it's about finding your way where you're happy with yourself. And I was moving towards talking about self-forgiveness, and I kind of got sidetracked a bit because of knowing that force is there. But in lovingness, when we love ourselves, we can forgive ourselves because this universal energy that I talk about, you're already forgiven. There's no judgment there. But we as humans have lots of judgment because we're supposed to fit in some little box that someone decides. And the thing is, we don't. Some people I know are so creative. Some people I know have brilliant minds, but cannot handle a simplest emotion. So they justify everything by their thought patterning, but they're not happy. Happiness comes because you know your feelings, you know your thoughts. By addressing the feelings by name, that's the big key, they will clear. By addressing the thoughts that you don't want, by freezing, evaporating, and changing them, then you can have this unity within yourself so that you can deal with big things, that you can become more and more of who you truly are and express out into the world those things. And you don't have those I call repeated blocks. How come the same thing keeps happening to me? I hear that sometimes. How come this happens? Well, let's take a look, see why it's happening. And often it's because they're not listening to their feelings at all. That part of them is shut down because we're supposed to be in mental control. And that's not what mental control is. Mental is creating, is putting out what it is you want, what you want to create, and what you want to do. So on that note, just think about how you're operating. Are you aware of your feelings? Are you willing to name them, or at least begin to figure out what they are? And are you in command of how you think? Or are you just thinking whatever? There's a lot of things out there that can sidetrack us from our main, you might say, beingness of our lives, and coping and handling and dealing with pressure or awareness and strength. And I just want you all, because that's in my heart, I just want everyone to be able to be happy with themselves where they are. And I really want to say thank you for listening. I really, really appreciate it. I also want to welcome a couple more people who have subscribed this week, and I really appreciate that. Your comments are always welcome, and you can always contact me through my website, normacowie.com, and of course the 3 W's in front. And you have a great week, and I'll be back on Sunday with my Sunday Thought, and again next Wednesday. So you enjoy.